Excellencies, esteemed guests, and colleagues. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today in this important session on the impact of climate change on oceans. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we have a diverse audience today. We have representatives from government entities. We have representatives from non-government entities, private sector, and people from the community. At the beginning, Her Excellency Dr. Amna Dhahak has given a very important scientific knowledge in her speech this morning, highlighting the impacts of climate change on ocean, whether it's rising sea levels, acidity, the impact of marine ecosystem, and how different organisms within the oceans are being impacted by climate change. Today, we have in this panel a number of experts from the UAE, from the region, and from around the world, representing different entities. Before we jump into our discussion and highlight on the impacts that were addressed in previous sessions and in today's keynote speeches, I would like to introduce my panelists. I have here Alexandra, founder and CEO of Sea Going Green. Next to her, we have, I bet everyone here in the audience knows her, she's from the UAE, Leila Abdel Latif, the Director General of Emirates Nature, WWF, and Chair of WWF's Asia Pacific 25. Next to her, we have Professor Carlos. He is the Executive Director of Coral Research and Development Accelerator Platform. He's also a professor at the University of King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. And he's been in our region for almost 10 years now, hence he has a different name. He is Khalid Al-Andalusi. He likes to go by that name. He was born in Lisbon, Portugal, hence he has his last name Al-Andalusi. And Khalid, he's been here for 10 years, so he has been in this region for a while.
Thank you. Shukran.
And last but not least, we have Jennifer Gibbons, co-founder of Palu Legacy Project and managing director of the Friends of the Palu National Marine Sanctuary. It's an NGO. Thank you for being a part of this discussion and for coming to this important forum. Now, if we start by reflecting on the key messages that were highlighted earlier today on the impacts of climate change on oceans. What can we do? Maybe, Leila, you can tell us a bit, what can we do? Now, rising sea levels are there, increased temperatures are there, acidity is there, many marine ecosystems are being impacted. So what can we do? What adaptation figures can we take into play?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me here today as well. I think we heard a lot from the earlier panelists, also from the Vice President of Maldives, that again, this connectedness of our oceans and climate change cannot be denied, right? And we really need to focus on going beyond just disaster relief efforts and really look at building resilience in our local communities. And that requires us going into a lot more depth when it comes to this nexus between disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and nature-based solutions. And I believe that's a critical stage that we're at globally, but also in our region, right? If you look at the Asia-Pacific region, for example, 6 of the 10 most vulnerable countries and communities around the world are placed in the Asia-Pacific region when it comes to climate change. And most of those countries as well are primarily based along the coastline. Just in 2023, for example, the Asia-Pacific region faced over $63 billion in economic losses due to natural catastrophes. So how do we make sure we're looking at this convergence between humanitarian relief efforts, but also building and safeguarding our communities in the long run. And this is something, as WWF, we focused on as well, quite heavily more recently. We have a partnership with IFRC, the International Federation for Red Cross and Red Crescent, where we work on designing climate-based, nature-based solutions and climate adaptation solutions that can be integrated within those disaster risk reduction management plans at a local community level. They have to be very site-specific, but the goal is that we're looking at rehabilitating and reforesting our mangroves, right? We're looking at the interconnectivity of our wider coastal lagoons. How do we protect not just our mangroves, but our coral reefs, our seagrasses, our mudflats, because they act as that natural storm barrier that, if protected well, can actually reduce storm surges by up to 70%. We know that our part of the world is facing extreme weather events, whether they're typhoons, cyclones, flooding, storm surges, and how do we build up those natural barriers so that the local communities that live along the coastline are less impacted by the continuing intensity and frequency of climate change impacts.
So definitely communities are definitely an important factor and element to be looked at. Maybe we were discussing this earlier, maybe Jennifer, you have something to add on that. How can we maintain the life that coastal communities have?
Well, I'd like to first say thank you for inviting me here. I feel very honored. And thank you for the government for bringing us to the edge of government, where we were able to display some of the work that we're doing that's on the ground. So please come join us at the edge of government when you get a chance. But I really appreciate the initial comments. I'm just a mom. That's my number one job, is I'm a mom to 2 kids. I have a husband, and those are my top priorities. And I'm thinking about, how do I behave? What is my specific individual behavior that I can do and pass on to my children and make sure that they are going to be able to thrive, not just survive, but thrive these climate issues. And I'm just going to follow up, exactly reinforcing the points that Madame said earlier, which is we've got to maintain our mangroves, we've got to maintain our taro patches, we've got to maintain our farms. These are our traditional practices that we used to keep the food supply, food security, to maintain cultural relationships, our language, and our traditions. Unfortunately, the Western life and influence has told us to import all of our foods, cans, plastics, all the containers that keep them fresh, and taken us away from our traditional food, which is what we know historically is what has nourished us, but also has kept us safe. The mangroves have always been a priority. They're a nursery. Palau has met its 30 by 30 goals. We have over 30% of our landmass has been fully protected. We have the largest percentage of our exclusive economic zone closed to all extractive access. So no take, no fisheries, no drilling, dredging of any kind. So I pledge that we will try and future-proof this, but there is a lot of economic pressure for us to open it back up to fisheries. Money, 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 money. How can we make more money? And I would like to pose to the panel how you can help us be, again, a beacon of, it's okay to keep your traditional practices. It's okay because science proves out that those traditional practices work. And how can we, in our tourism sector, get that kind of attention that makes them excited to see our people be Palauan. That's what I'm good at. I'm good at being Palauan. So help us keep our traditional practices.
Alexandria, maybe you can highlight on that, actually. Given that you have experience in building touristic areas around coastal areas, how can we maintain what has been achieved there and yet be able to open coastal areas for tourism?
Of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here today. I'm really honored. And I'm coming at this from a bit of a different background. I'm a marine biologist and oceanographer with a tourism background, and I run a regenerative tourism social enterprise with a really big mission to alleviate the negative impacts of tourism on the environment and the marine environment as a whole. So I really want to start this session with everyone closing their eyes and really imagining diving in the Great Barrier Reef, or since we're in the UAE, somewhere in the Gulf. So as a marine biologist, I'm imagining a really beautiful, healthy reef with a lot of different species around. But unfortunately, the actual reality is much more bleak than that. I'm sure Dr. Carlos will tell us a little bit more, but we're actually set to, unfortunately, lose more than 75%, and I think the numbers are much higher than that by 2030. And as the coral reefs, unfortunately, are dying, the tourism industry, for example, is only growing. It is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. It is responsible for over 10% of the world's GDP. I think about 11 out of 100 jobs are in tourism, and it relies so heavily on the oceans. So for us, it's really about promoting regenerative tourism practices. So I'm really glad to see the industry is moving away from just sustainable tourism practices, so not leaving any negative impacts on environment, community, and economy, but actually going one step forward and really focusing on regenerative tourism practices. So doing more mitigation, doing more adaptation. For us, it's really important to do the top-down and the bottom-up approach. So top-down, working with governments. We're working with the government of Sharjah, for example, really working on preserving the cultural sustainability of Sharjah as a destination. So really having those government policies that will actually inspire private sector to work on regenerative tourism practices. But also bottom-up is very important. A big part of our work is stakeholder engagement, so anything from the community level, and really highlighting the grassroots initiatives, because as we mentioned, culture is really important to preserve, and I'd love to also highlight the Palau Pledge. It is a big case study that we work a lot with, that we highlight a lot. It is an amazing example of how you can actually get consumers also involved in regenerative tourism. So I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about the Palau Pledge at some point as well. Thank you.
So Professor Carlos, did we reach the 1.5 threshold? What's the link between ocean and climate change?
Thank you. So I'd like to start by thanking the UAE and the Ministry of Climate Change for organizing this event. I'm very impressed, and I think it's very timely to have this conversation in preparation for the UN Ocean Conference also in June this year. And this conference is happening against a very dark backdrop. And since June 2023, we reached that lower bracket of the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degree above pre-industrial levels, and we're still there, and we're actually going up towards the 2 degrees centigrade. So this is no longer a target of the future. We're already there, and we are now summarizing the impacts of the first year at 1.5 degree of warming in the planet. That translates to 1 degree of warming in the upper ocean, and that's the equilibrium temperature, and it reaches that equilibrium very fast. So we've been already for about 16 months above 1 degree in the ocean, 1.5 in the atmosphere, and what we're seeing is a catalog of devastating effects on the ocean ecosystems across the regions from Antarctica, where we have seen unprecedented loss of sea ice and ice shelves, and also reproductive failure for penguins and other fauna, all the way to the Arctic. But the most dramatic impacts have been happening in the tropics. We've seen a dramatic loss of coral reefs, unfortunately, even in the areas where they were believed to be most resilient, like the Red Sea. And whereas we lost 14% of global coral reefs between 2010 and 2020 in 1 decade, in this year and a half, we are starting to collect data from around the world, but we probably have lost 2/3 of remaining coral reefs in just 1 year. Just imagine that. It takes 5,000 years to build those coral reefs, and we lost them in just 1.5 years. So I'd like to invoke a statement by Martin Luther King in a very different context, and is that we have to realize that tomorrow is today, and we need to face the fierce urgency of the now. And that urgency of the now of action needs to come through 2 main drivers. One, innovation, and we heard Alterra and actually the leadership that the UAE has been exerting on climate action since Dubai, the COP28 and forward. And the other one is global collaboration. And then there's one element in this conversation, which is sustainability, that I like to bring in, because sustainability is not about stamps and 18, 17 goals. Sustainability is really about looking at future generations and our responsibility towards them. So often we say that 1 billion people's livelihoods depend on coral reefs, but this is only of the living. We need to look at the ones that are coming after us. And because it takes 5,000 years to build a coral reef, that's 200 human generations that if we don't take action, we might deprive of enjoying the benefits of coral reefs and actually living in an ocean where coral reefs are things that you hear about in history books and for your elders. So that cannot happen under our watch. And I believe that now we need to look at the action that is required with a different eye. It is no longer a cost proposition, but it's actually a value proposition, because investing in oceans create wealth and create jobs. And the new blue economy, which is underpinned through regenerative tourism, through natural capital, through marine genetic resources on healthy oceans, now is an opportunity for investment, and we can multiply by 5 the value that the ocean brings to our economy while contributing to reverse all of the damage and deliver a healthy ocean, not for us, but for our grandfather, for my grandchildren and your grandchildren in the room.
His Excellency Majid Aswedi, head of Altera, actually left us with a very positive note at the end of his discussion point. How can we put in positive? How can we give? We always talk about what we take, but what can we give? What nature-based solutions can be put in place to mitigate so that it's not too late to reserve the marine ecosystems, coral reefs, or the whole marine ecosystem as we know it today?
May I?
Keep the floor open.
I'd really like to use that pull-out pledge example. It might just have started with a stamp in your passport, but we've also evolved it into incorporating our visitors into our communities. So if you want to go visit a village in Palau, you need to be invited in to visit those villages if you want that experience. And so what we're looking for is how can we engage with the local community and then participate with them in those activities that are not only exciting for a tourist to engage in. Come to the taro patches. They're amazing. Great for the skin. It's where mudding started. Or go fishing. I know it sounds silly, but I'm a board member of the Palau Sport Fishing Association. That's where our fishermen go out there. They know their traditional fishing sites, and it is an amazing experience to come with us and have that knowledge that was passed down from generations before and experience it as a visitor. So for us, that is one of our ways forward.
Right. Thank you. Any closing remarks? I see the time is ticking. Time is up.
If I may quickly.
I'll keep the floor open for final remarks.
Yeah, so then nature-based solutions, it's a really good avenue to address the problems that I mentioned before and we discussed before. I'd like to recognize the leading role of Emirates in understanding the value of mangroves. 50 years ago, the founding father of the nation already embarked on a large-scale mangrove afforestation project that has doubled the area of mangroves in the whole Arabian Gulf. That is now followed by the rest of the world. And nature-based solutions is a strategy to decarbonize the atmosphere, to recarbonize the biosphere, and then create more natural capital, which is the new real estate of the future.
Thank you.
I think just echoing that as well, it's really about scaling up efforts on nature-based solutions on the ground, real interventions and case studies. We were successful at COP28 to really push nature-based solutions on the center stage. And now it's all about showcasing the real impact of nature-based solutions and scaling up financing towards that.
Thank you.
And quickly, if I can also just raise a point that without sustainable fisheries, we cannot reach our goals. So I definitely really wanted to highlight that technology absolutely can help us in our regenerative goals. But as we were talking, we should also be looking at more traditional fishing practices that our ancestors have been doing. Unfortunately, dynamite fishing is still happening worldwide. We work a lot in Sri Lanka, for example, and we're seeing devastating effects on the ocean. So I definitely want just to raise that in a platform like this, that we really need to look at banning dynamite fishing as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me in a hand of applause to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.